Prime Minister, Vice-Chancellor, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Lestrange. I'm the Director of the National Security College here at the Australian National University. And I'd like to begin today's proceedings by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and their ancient and continuing culture. I'm delighted to welcome all of you here to this first official occasion of the National Security College. I'd particularly like to welcome the Prime Minister, to thank him for his presence and the significance he adds to this occasion, and to say how much we're looking forward to his address today. I'd also like to welcome the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, and I'm delighted that so many ambassadors, high commissioners, and other members of the Corps are here today, and I certainly look forward to working closely with them. I'm also delighted that a number of departmental secretaries, heads of agency, and other members of the Australian Public Service are here, and I warmly welcome them. I'd particularly like to welcome the National Security Advisor, Duncan Lewis, the Chief of the Defence Force, Air Marshal Angus Houston, the Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, Tony Negus, and on this particular day, the eve of Anzac Day, I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to Admiral Ken Doolan, the National President of the Returned and Services League of Australia. There are a number of academic staff and members of the student community from the Australian National University here. I warmly welcome all of them, and I also warmly welcome members of community groups and individuals who are deeply interested in and committed to national security studies. Our host today is the Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University, Professor Ian Chubb, and I'd now invite the Vice-Chancellor to introduce the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Michael. Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ANU colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. More than 6 decades ago, the Australian National University was founded with high aspirations, great hopes and a deep resolve. Its creation in 1946 was a powerful expression of the spirit of nation building, optimism and indeed confidence in the future that epitomised Australia in the years following the hardships and the sacrifices of the Second World War. The founders of this university wanted it to, and I quote, take its rightful place among the great universities of the world and to play an important role in aligning Australia with, and I quote, with the great and enlightened nations of the world. Now, these were high aspirations, and especially in the world at that time, and especially for a university in Australia being established at that time. So for more than 60 years, the ANU has pursued its mission, inspired by a commitment to the highest intellectual standards, to national purposes and to international engagement. We've strived to do so with energy, academic energy and innovation, but with a deep sense of civic engagement and, if I may so, in a measured and even uncharacteristically humble way, with some significant success. But like most institutions, most significant institutions in a country like ours, or in any other country for that matter, you can't live off your past. You should never think you can live off your past. You have to adapt to and respond to the exigencies of the time and the future as best you can predict it. So we need at ANU to be restless and productive in our search for new ways of fulfilling our mission. And we need to build new partnerships for cooperation underpinned by an unwavering commitment to academic integrity, to research-driven excellence, and to the highest standards of teaching. In short, the ANU needs to keep reinventing itself to ensure that our contribution to Australia's national life will remain as vibrant and as constructive in the 21st century as it was in the 20th. Now, many of you know that the ANU remains the only Australian university to be established by an Act of the Federal Parliament. It was established as, and it continues to be, a strategic endowment for this nation. This isn't just an historical legacy for the university, it constitutes a modern and continuing challenge for us. It's a challenge to be a world leader in research and teaching. It's a challenge to focus creatively on issues that engage Australian national purposes. And I don't think that we should at ANU ever forget that one of the reasons why we're established and continue to be needed is that we are able strategically to embrace issues of national importance and Australia finding its place in a new and changing world. There is a challenge to interact as productively as possible with the world's best researchers, teachers and institutions and form partnerships that give us a critical mass that is way beyond the scope of us as a single institution. And there is a challenge to maintain a continuing involvement with our graduates and with the wider Australian community of which they are part. So throughout our history, the ANU has developed a special expertise in and a high international reputation for our international relations scholarship. It was one of the ways that Australia was able to align itself with the civilised nations of the world. Today, public policy and academic research share a common focus on forces of change that are transforming aspects of the international system and that have direct implications for Australian global interests and for our regional priorities. These forces of change include the shifting relativities of power to and within the Asia-Pacific region, new patterns of interdependence among states, the realities of global terrorism and weapons proliferation, the increasing role of non-state actors, including international criminal networks, and the impact of technology on security. In meeting these and other challenges, Australia needs to galvanise all, and I underline all our resources, and I underline all our expertise, across government, business, academia and the wider community. So the ANU is committed to building collaborative, trusted networks of cooperation in the national interest. We're committed in particular, Prime Minister, to what you described in your Bergman lecture here last year as a new and reinvigorated strategic relationship between the ANU and the Australian Government, and to a relationship between us that you said, and I quote, that puts education and research at the centre of building robust public policy. The National Security College, which the Prime Minister will talk to us about in a moment, is a joint venture between the Commonwealth Government and the ANU. It's an important dimension of this reinvigorated strategic relationship between us. So we're delighted, Prime Minister, that you're here today to launch the college. We thank you most sincerely for the impetus that you have given to this initiative personally and ensured that things happened. And we look forward to maximising the possibilities that it opens up. And I can assure you, Prime Minister, that as the Vice-Chancellor of the ANU, we will do everything we possibly can to make sure it works for you, your government and the people of Australia. So it's in this spirit that it gives me great pleasure to invite the Prime Minister to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Chubb, the Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University, National Security Advisor Duncan Lewis, the Chief of the Australian Defence Force, Angus Houston, the Head of the Australian Federal Police, Tony Negus, other heads of agencies and departments from our wider national security community, Admiral Ken Doolan, the National President of the RSL, and I too, in particular, Admiral, today, acknowledge the significance which Anzac Day has for all Australians, and a day upon which it is appropriate that we reflect upon the importance of our continued obligation to provide for the national security of this country, Australia. Professor Michael Lestrange, the Director of the National Security College, members of the Diplomatic Corps, parliamentary colleagues, members of the national security community more broadly, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today is the eve of Anzac Day, and we commemorate those who have served our nation in conflict. On Anzac Day, we remember too that the national security for Australians has long meant international action. We have known since before our federation that events around the globe can and do have a direct impact on our nation, Australia. And in the 21st century, that is the case now more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no greater responsibility for government than that of national security. The defence of our nation, the protection of our people, the upholding of the values we live by and the interests which we hold dear, these are paramount. This has been the sacred trust between all of our governments and the Australian people throughout our federated history. On the eve of Anzac Day, we remember that this is the honour we owe those who have served and are serving today in the defence of Australia. We remember those thousands of Australian Defence Force personnel at work today, acting, working, putting their lives on the line in defence of Australia's national interests. We also honour our police, our diplomats and so many other dedicated officials employed in the service of our nation's security, both at home and abroad. We salute their service and their families who stand rock solid beside them as they stand rock solid beside Australia. We respect their commitment. We pay special tribute to those who have fallen in the defence of our land. We salute their sacrifice. Their sacrifice reminds us afresh of our responsibility to ensure we have the capabilities to deal with the vast array of security challenges that lie ahead for Australia. In 2008, I outlined in Parliament the ever more complex and interconnected dimensions of our national security environment in the first ever National Security Statement to the Australian Parliament by any Australian government. From dealing with traditional defence and diplomatic challenges to emerging security challenges such as the persistent threat of terrorism, the evils of people smuggling, organised crime, cybersecurity and the perils of natural disasters, pandemics and the emerging threats that arise from climate change. Since then, we have been hard at work in building the right policy framework for a comprehensive approach to the increasingly dynamic and interconnected dimensions of our national security. In 2009, we ended a decade-long gap in the comprehensive review of Australia's Defence Force and our national defence. The Defence White Paper provides a blueprint for our defence capabilities in the context of an increasingly demanding strategic environment, where we need a force that is capable of meeting the demands for the defence of Australia, the needs of current operations, while also being able to make a contribution to a wide range of potential contingencies in our immediate region, the Asia-Pacific, and more widely across the world. This Defence White Paper represents the most powerful, integrated and sophisticated set of military capabilities that our nation has ever acquired. It will ensure that the Australian Defence Force has the reach, the weight, the capabilities to meet the national security challenges of the future. It creates the pathway for the development of Force 2030, a major step up in Australia's military preparedness and the most potent range of capabilities Australia has ever held. We have committed to 3% real growth in the defence budget to 2017-18 and over 2% out to 2030. Importantly, the Defence White Paper also introduces stringent financial disciplines on defence, including a substantial savings program to maximise efficiencies and the return on the taxpayer's investment. This is the most comprehensive and coherent approach to our defence forces in a generation. But the defence effort is only one side of the coin. How Australia manages its diplomacy, and in particular its key diplomatic relationships, is also critical. On this front, the government in its 2 years in office has also been active. We are at the dawn of the Asia-Pacific century. Our relationships with the major powers in our region and the relationships of these powers with one another will determine the strategic environment in which we operate. Of these, our alliance with the United States remains Australia's single most important security relationship. This will not change. The strategic stability of our region will in large part depend on the continuing strong presence of the United States. We have intensified our cooperation with President Obama's administration and are working closely together on any number of regional and global issues, from addressing the global economic crisis to matters of global security, such as Iran and the DPRK's nuclear programs, climate change and regional developments. Japan is our closest partner in East Asia, and with whom we have strengthened our bilateral security cooperation. We have co-hosted with Japan the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, which is playing an influential role in the lead-up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference later this year. This is complemented by our trilateral strategic dialogue with the United States. We are in active negotiation with Japan on a free trade agreement, and in forums such as APEC and the East Asia Summit and the G20, Australia and Japan work closely together. We are continuing to strengthen our relationship with China. China is Australia's largest trading partner, and Australia has been working closely with China over the past year on critical global challenges such as the global financial crisis and regional economic integration. Australia has also begun a high-level strategic dialogue with China, in addition to engagement at the highest levels between our respective security establishments and our defence forces. Australia looks forward to deepening this dialogue with Beijing in the future and expanding new areas of security cooperation with China, and, together with our other friends and partners in the region, working on common challenges of security that we all face. At the same time, India and Australia have now designated the relationship between us as a strategic partnership. This is a recognition by both countries of the growing breadth and depth of our relations and our ability to prosecute shared strategic perspectives, something this government has worked hard to achieve and was reflected in the conclusions reached between myself and the Prime Minister of India and my trip to New Delhi at the end of last year. India is a major power with a widening strategic influence, and Australia looks forward to the unfolding security engagement between our two countries, as the Indian Ocean is increasingly a region of vital strategic interest to us all. Australia and Indonesia have also now designated their relationship as one of strategic partnership. President Yudhoyono's recent visit to Australia and his historic address to the Australian Parliament symbolises the added strength we have brought to this vital relationship. The President captured it best in his address to the Parliament when he said, and I quote him, "Australia and Indonesia have a great future together. We're not just neighbours, we're not just friends, we are strategic partners." As with our defence, our key strategic relationships are in good order and strengthening. This government will continue to work these relationships and others across our wider region to enhance regional security for us all. And I'd pay tribute to the contributions of so many regional countries represented here in our deliberations today. This wider regional collaboration on our wider security challenges lies at the heart of the government's initiative for an Asia-Pacific community. The shifting of global strategic and economic weight to the Asia-Pacific is changing the strategic calculus of our region. We need to anticipate and to manage this challenge, not simply to respond to it. Regional dynamism and growth coupled with Asia's history are likely to generate new challenges and exacerbate existing tensions. While the region is largely at peace and on a positive trajectory, we cannot take this for granted. History would caution us to the contrary. We need actively to shape our regional future and lay the foundations for dealing with future challenges. We need to continue to foster regional habits of cooperation. That is why the government has advocated the development of regional architecture that has the right membership and mandate to address the full spectrum of challenges confronting the region: economic, political and security. The architecture must have ASEAN at its core and include other key nations of the region: the United States, China, Japan, the Republic of Korea, India, New Zealand, Australia and Russia. The inclusion of the United States and Russia in our region's emerging architecture is fundamental to the evolution of what I call an Asia-Pacific community. In fact, so much of Australia's diplomacy has been driven by this core concern: how to integrate in particular the role of the United States in the future broad architecture of our region. In this context, I welcome very much the decision of ASEAN leaders at their summit in Hanoi on the 8th and 9th of April this year to encourage the United States and to encourage Russia to deepen their engagement in the evolving regional architecture. While the countries of the region will need to settle how a reformed regional architecture might be constituted, the ASEAN Summit outcome offers a critical step forward to the long-term architecture our region needs for our long-term future together. It is also in pursuit of Australia's interest that the government is seeking a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council in 2013-14. The Security Council of the United Nations is the key decision-making forum of that international body. It is the preeminent body dealing with international security. It deliberates on matters of war and peace. Its mission is to uphold the global rules-based order on which we are all so dependent and of which we are all beneficiaries. Australia has a big stake in the decisions of the UNSC. It is already a quarter of a century since Australia was a member of the Security Council. Securing this seat is by no means assured, given that Australia entered the field later than most other countries in the field, given the previous Australian government's decision not to contest. Nonetheless, ours is a vigorous candidacy because we believe we have a real contribution to make. We have long contributed to peace building in many of the world's trouble spots, including current deployments in Afghanistan, East Timor, the Solomons, the Sudan and Sinai. Australia has unimpeachable non-proliferation credentials and is widely recognised as a leader in this field, including through our role in the Nuclear Suppliers Group and more recently through the initiative to establish the International Commission for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, the ICCND. Over the years, we have been creative contributors to regional and global security, from our role in the independence of East Timor to the Cambodia Peace Plan, from our key role in finalising the Chemical Weapons Convention to our continuing role in the security of the Solomon Islands. Opponents here at home of Australia playing an active and assertive role in the councils of the world, I believe, sell this country short. Australia has a global contribution to make, as recognised by successive Australian governments of all political persuasion since 1945. Although remarkably that seems to have changed in recent years for reasons that have nothing to do with the national interest and perhaps has something more to do with a partisan interest at home. Opponents of Australia's active role in global affairs have a small Australia mindset. This mindset would never have got us a seat at what has now become the world's premier global economic decision-making body, the G20. We were not assured a seat at that table, as diplomats representing those governments of the G20 would well attest in their reflections on the diplomatic cable traffic at the time. But through the force of Australia's ideas and her advocacy, we secured the G20 as the right global grouping, and we are now working with the other 19 largest economies in the world to build a sustainable global economic recovery after the worst crisis since the Great Depression. For Australia, this is a significant achievement. The success of the G20 in stabilising the global economy has been to the benefit of all Australians, and the securing of a seat for Australia at the world's top table for economic governance will be to the lasting benefit of our national interest, whoever constitutes the future governments of Australia in the decades to come. The great challenges of managing complex geostrategic systems and relations between states will not go away. But security is no longer something that can be defended only at our borders and beyond. As I've made clear in my address to the Parliament on national security in 2008, responsible governments must also face up to the reality of a new global security environment and emerging threats. Non-traditional national security challenges are rapidly becoming the norm rather than the exception. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 on the United States and the global violent jihadist movement that went on to carry out or inspire attacks elsewhere, all are deeply sealed in our memory. September 11 may now seem a long time ago, at least for some. My message to the Australian public is simple. The terrorist threat at home and abroad is increasing, not decreasing. It is constantly mutating. And the fact that to date we have not had a repeat of the carnage of the order of magnitude we saw on September the 11th is a tribute to the skill and professionalism of all of our security agencies. Nonetheless, the December 25 incident in the United States last year demonstrates the fundamental importance of continuing and absolute vigilance. Today's highly interconnected, mobile and technology-dependent world has blurred the classical distinctions between foreign and domestic, between state and non-state security threats. It has also meant that interconnected systems and growing interdependencies, fed by ever faster and cheaper technology, is increasing our vulnerability to disruption. Computer hackers and internet cafes can penetrate national security systems. They can also steal commercial secrets. Virtual imams can recruit suicide bombers off the net. And viruses can spread from a chicken farm in China to infect cities across the world with the speed of an A380. The breadth of the challenge we face to national security has never been greater, never more complex. But at the top of this list, terrorism has become a persistent and permanent feature of the Australian security environment. The threat is real, it is enduring, and it is increasing. It is twofold in nature, emerging both from the violent global jihadist movement itself and from locally generated but globally inspired radicals. The government released this year the Counter-Terrorism White Paper, the first since 2004, and the first to bring together the domestic and international elements of our policy approach. This involves multiple government agencies and all levels of federal, state and local government. Domestically, we are improving our intelligence and analysis, strengthening our protective measures and building resilience. As part of an integrated effort, we are establishing a counter-terrorism control centre to ensure a seamless flow of information for action across government. Internationally, we are working with close friends and partners, such as Indonesia, to strengthen intelligence and law enforcement collaboration and create an international environment that is hostile to terrorism. These are determined efforts to address the threat of terrorism. But as the White Paper makes clear, the threat is serious and enduring. The government can take measures to reduce the risk of terrorist attack, but it cannot eliminate that risk. Another attack on Australia, our people, or our interests could happen at any time. Our intelligence is good, and our intelligence, police and security professionals are doing a highly professional job. But the nature of the murky world of terrorists is that their aims and plans are hidden and opaque. Under these circumstances, there is absolutely no room for complacency on terrorism. It is this analysis that galvanises Australia's national interest in our continuing commitment in Afghanistan. Australia's interest is to prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a haven for terrorists, to prevent Afghanistan becoming a launching pad for attacks against us and other countries around the world. It is fitting to consider amidst these halls of learning, freedom and tolerance, that those we are up against in Afghanistan would tear such institutions down. They have done so in the past, and they would do so in the future. The operations of the international coalition in Afghanistan are at a critical point in time. It is a time when there is a real opportunity to make real inroads against the Taliban and their al-Qaeda supporters, to make space for the government of Afghanistan to build national support and to ready the Afghan armed forces for the responsibility of security within their own country. This is why last year we made the difficult decision to increase our troop commitment by around 14% to more than 1,500 troops in support of a strategy for success. Australia strongly supports the new US-led strategy for the international coalition in Afghanistan. This strategy is based on a sophisticated combination of military and civilian effort to ensure that the government of Afghanistan can increasingly step up to its responsibilities for both security and for governance. The focus of our military effort is on training Afghan troops in Uruzgan province so that they can provide in time for their own security. And on this, let me be clear, we will not keep our troops in Afghanistan one day longer than is necessary to enable that transition to occur. The ADF in Uruzgan has mentored the Afghan National Army 4th Brigade headquarters, a 400-man infantry Kandak and elements of the brigade's combat and logistics support Kandaks. The ADF will continue this mentoring task and plans to take on the mentoring of the remainder of the ANA's 4th Brigade by the end of 2010. Our core mission in Afghanistan is on track, but there is more to be done. As part of our support for President Obama's strategy late last year, I foreshadowed an increase in our civilian commitment in Afghanistan. This will comprise additional diplomatic, development assistance and policing support. This will see roughly a doubling of our diplomatic and aid effort to strengthen our capacity to understand and influence developments on the ground and to build the capacity of the government of Afghanistan at the provincial and national level. Like our military contribution, this enhanced civilian contribution will be focused on Uruzgan province, to complement the good work being done by the ADF already in building roads and bridges and rebuilding schools. Work that I've seen on the ground, work I believe all Australians would be proud of. Our increased policing effort is targeted at strengthening our ability to train the Afghan National Police so that they too can increasingly assume greater responsibility for their own law and order needs and allow us to transfer that responsibility to them. And I thank the Australian Federal Police for their cooperation in this endeavour. Our civilian increases will amount to around 50% more than our existing contribution and will be a force multiplier for our total effort in Afghanistan over time. It will enhance our capacity to prosecute our strategy with international partners and to promote our interests with the Afghan government. In this, we will continue to make it clear to the government of Afghanistan that we expect them to meet their responsibilities as well. More effective civilian-military integration for all the elements of our contribution to Afghanistan will ensure that we are all pulling together in the same direction for success. This approach is entirely consistent with General McChrystal's strategy for Afghanistan, which is based on the time-honoured truth that military effort alone will not deliver success in conflicts like this. Unless we are using and coordinating all instruments of national power, we will be less effective. This is serious work. It involves hard yards. It is dangerous work. There have been Australian casualties in this effort. We can expect that there will be more in the future. But it is necessary work that we do, and it is work that we do with our closest ally, the United States. And I acknowledge also the contribution from so many other members of the coalition who are represented again in this gathering today from across the world. The strength of our alliance with the United States is founded on our bearing the burden of security together. This is fundamental. As the largest non-NATO military contributor to Afghanistan, we are fulfilling that fundamental responsibility. And Australia has never walked away from the United States in times of need, nor will we do so now. Australia's military commitment to Afghanistan and the conditions attached to it have been the product of detailed deliberations of the National Security Committee of our Cabinet. This work has been led by the Minister for Defence, John Faulkner. It involves detailed, delicate diplomatic work because the government remains acutely aware that our decisions involve the lives of 1,500 of our men and women in uniform on the ground today. This work has also been carefully calibrated with our friends and allies. That's why the government finds the contribution to this debate on Afghanistan by the Leader of the Opposition yesterday characteristically reckless. The Leader of the Opposition has said Australia should now lead the military operations in Oresgun given the recent decisions by the Dutch government. To be clear, such a decision would require the further deployment of an additional 1,000 or more troops to Afghanistan. To be clear, such a deployment would cost the Australian taxpayer in the order of a further $1 billion each year. Once again, we have an example of erratic policy making on the run, this time on national security. When I delivered the first national security statement in Parliament in December of 2008, I made the point that in an increasingly complex and interconnected security environment, we needed a more integrated national security structure that enhanced the national security policy coordination and implementation of our nation. Since that time, we've made considerable strides towards a more integrated whole-of-government approach to national security, one that moves seamlessly from domestic to international, from traditional to non-traditional, that is agile, that is responsive to today's dynamic and fast-paced security environment. We've created the position of a National Security Advisor. This position has developed and supported whole-of-government national security policy development and crisis response. It is building a genuine national security community. We cannot afford the stovepiping which has traditionally characterised our security agencies. The strands of national security effort, foreign and domestic, defence and diplomacy, policy and intelligence, federal and state, are now better coordinated, but more needs to be done. Whether it was in responding to the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria or to the tsunami that struck Samoa and Tonga, the National Security Advisor of the Australian Government has been the active centre driving our response across government, as has also been the case in the development of the government's policy on critical strategic and foreign policy challenges, such as Afghanistan and cybersecurity, including the government's new cybersecurity strategy. We are also working towards a coordinated budget process across the entire national security community. This year, as part of the budget process, the government has brought together all of the national security-related proposals from relevant agencies under a single umbrella. This has allowed us to weigh options and shift resources with and between portfolios to best achieve our national security priorities. We have also learned through experience in responding to disasters and conflicts in our region that we are at our most effective when we are able to draw on all elements of our national power, military and civilian. The Australian Defence Force, whilst indispensable and invaluable, cannot be the sum total of our national effort. So we are creating a civilian response corps to enable the rapid deployment of Australian civilians into overseas disaster or conflict zones. An office of the Australian Civilian Corps has been established within AUSAID to implement the initiative and create a register of Australians with valuable skill sets who can be deployed rapidly abroad to respond to crises. It should have an interim capability by mid-2010 and be fully operational by early 2011. In addition, we have created the Asia-Pacific Civil Military Centre of Excellence. Australia has a long and proud record of contributing to peace and stabilisation operations and to disaster management around the world. The centre is designed to capitalise on our expertise and support the development of improved national civil military capabilities to prevent and respond more effectively to conflict and disasters overseas. We have also established a National Intelligence Coordination Committee chaired by the National Security Advisor to ensure our national intelligence effort is effectively integrated and aligned with our national security policies. Of course, an important foundation for a functioning national security community is effective information sharing. We know this both at home and from the experiences of friendly and other governments abroad. We know from experience that the consequences of not sharing the right information with the right people at the right time can in fact be catastrophic. We needed to work together on this to improve our efforts as a national security community. That is why the government has supported the community's proposal for the National Security Information Environment Roadmap 2020. This roadmap provides for the first time a single strategy to address the many barriers to information sharing across our community. It challenges some outdated notions of information stovepipes and provides a clear vision of where we want to go with information sharing across the national security community over the decade ahead. It is aimed at ensuring that the right information can get to the right people at the right time. In all questions of national security, information and its effective dissemination is critical to all actions taken on the ground. Today, I am pleased to formally open the National Security College of Australia. This is an important day for Australia. This will become a central institution shaping the future of our national security policy, personnel, and our collaborative culture across the national security community. It will prove to be one of the most significant and enduring foundation stones of our new emerging national security community, because from it will emerge the national security practitioners and the culture of community and collaboration essential if Australia is to meet the security challenges of the 21st century. The College will strengthen the ability of national security leaders to analyse Australia's strategic environment and the dynamics of change within it, and to recognise and to respond to threats. Its courses and other activities, such as the College's outreach program, will help to build trusted networks of interaction between governments at all levels, business, academic and community organisations. We will include in the College participants from regional countries and from further afield as well, building our links with national security practitioners in our own neighbourhood and beyond. In this sense, it is also a useful confidence and security building measure. Its multidisciplinary approach and whole-of-government research projects will help to identify new and emerging security threats and effective countermeasures. It will help break down any remaining silos in our national security community. It will promote new ways of conceiving security threats and new ways of dealing with those threats. It will build up expertise across government. It will foster a new national security culture in Australia. We need a national security community and culture that has a common conceptual framework, a common language, rather than the different dialects that often unnecessarily separate our defence, foreign policy, intelligence and wider security community. I'm not suggesting that core specialist disciplinary skills should be substituted for some amorphous set of national security concepts. In fact, quite the reverse. The specialist training of our Defence Force, our diplomats and intelligence community must constantly improve in order to remain among the best in the world. No, I'm talking about a further set of skills that become an essential prerequisite for the future leaders of our national security community. To be blunt, it would be essential for all future candidates to senior executive service or equivalent positions across the national security community to graduate from an additional specialist national security course here at this college before advancing to future leadership positions. I hope I've made myself clear. That is why I have said that this National Security College of Australia will become central to the shape of the Australian national security community. That is why this is an important day for the nation. The college will receive up to $17.3 million over 4 years to assist with its establishment. In addition, a new building will be constructed for the college here at the Australian National University, likely to open around the end of 2012. I can think of no better person to be its initial director than Michael L'Estrange, a distinguished diplomat, a person of outstanding qualifications in the broad field of national security, outstanding qualifications in the broader sphere of public administration, and a person who will bring to this position the necessary skills to engage all elements of our national security community. So, Michael, I thank you for taking on this initial directorship. Can I also say I can think of no better national institution in which to locate this new national institution than the Australian National University. The Vice-Chancellor said before that under its Act of Parliament which established the ANU, this was to be an endowment to the nation. I can think of no more core national interest for the nation than the proper development of our national security capacity. Therefore, for this institution to be located within the ANU is the right fit for the country, it's the right fit for the nation's capital, because this is where our leaders for the future, across all arms of the national security community of our country, will do most of their work. Therefore, it's critical that this is where this new capacity for Australia is located. To conclude, this government stands for the strongest national security for Australia. We stand for a strong defence. We stand foursquare behind our alliance with the United States. We stand foursquare behind our continued association with other friends and partners in the region, including countries like New Zealand, with whom we have spent so many times and so much blood, sweat and tears around the world in common fields of endeavour. We stand committed to forging our key relationships in the region. We stand for the long-haul fight against terrorism both at home and abroad. We stand for a comprehensive, coherent and well-coordinated national security policy that uses all instruments of national power to meet contemporary national security challenges for Australia. That is why the inauguration of this new National Security College of Australia is an important day for our nation. I thank you.
Prime Minister, Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking the Prime Minister very much for the important address he's given us here today. In that speech, there are important statements of policy and principle that will be bench setters for the future. The Prime Minister's also, I think, set standards and challenges and aspirations that the national security community as a whole, in government, in academia, in the community, needs to try and reach. This was a speech of real national and international significance because of the insights that the Prime Minister gave and because of the policy directions that he set. It was a speech also that had a very powerful resonance at a more local level. This building in which we are meeting today honours the remarkable contribution to Australian public life of Sir John Crawford. He was one of those very rare individuals that managed to fit into a single lifetime many careers, each of them of singular and enduring significance. And he did this in careers that included as an economist, as a leader at the highest levels of public administration, as a catalyst for expanding the horizons of Australian public policy, particularly in terms of Australia's engagement with the Asia Pacific, and as a seminal figure in academia and university governance, particularly at this university, where he was at various times Professor of Economics, Vice-Chancellor, and then Chancellor. In addressing the national policy requirements, as the Prime Minister did today, I think he not only made a powerful statement about our national policy, but he also gave an authoritative contemporary focus to and added important dimensions to concerns and priorities that were the consuming passion of Sir John Crawford's life. And I felt that particularly when the Prime Minister spoke about the importance of relating knowledge to the problems of society, when he spoke about the relevance of trained analytical skills in addressing national security challenges, and when he spoke about the forces of change that are affecting Australia's interests, influence and opportunities, and in the encouragement he gave to all of us here today to work together in innovative ways to develop public policy alternatives and public policy options as we meet the challenges of these forces of change in the future. So I thank the Prime Minister for an important speech at many levels. This has been a very significant day for this university and for the national security community. On behalf of all of us, I'd like to convey our deep appreciation for his presence, which has made this such a special and significant occasion here in this Crawford building. And I hope that the message goes out from this occasion today to society as a whole, that we are all involved in this venture. Certainly, I'd like to thank you very much for the launch you've made today of the National Security College. This is an idea that you articulated and supported. It is now a practical reality because of today's announcement. So I thank you for that, and I can assure you and the Vice-Chancellor that all of us working at this college will do everything that we can to fulfil the great potential of this important initiative. It only remains for me to thank you again for coming and to ask if you could just wait for one moment until the Prime Minister and his party leaves, and then we shall all look forward to you joining us for a light lunch on a route that will be guided for you. Thank you very much.